Let's dive into this week's three big things. I think it is well established at this point that this is my favorite part of the show, and it's even more exciting when we get to do it and actually talk about racing that's happening either last weekend or next weekend. So a whole new take on the three big things this week. First off, we're going to talk a little bit about how the many different iterations that drag racing is going to take in the coming weeks, with some tracks being wide open, others being extremely limited, and everything in between. Alex is going to bring up a little bit of her thoughts on the logistics and just how our interactions at the racetracks we visit are going to change. Are we going to shake hands and hug and high five, or are we going to bump elbows from here on out? And I will book in the conversation with my thoughts on where we're at in the radial racing product life cycle, if you will. So anyways, Mike, let's get started and talk about what drag racing is going to look like, from a national event to these private test sessions or events like we saw in Darlington last weekend, wooostock. There's a lot of different forms these deals are going to take on.
I think change and ability to adapt is going to be the theme for the next several months. Is everyone just trying to navigate their political problems locally. Every state's different, every county's different. Within New York, 2 hours north of here, Lebanon Valley Dragway is opening up, but down here nothing's open. And so it's going to be interesting, track to track, what those changes are. We saw, wooostock had to quickly change from having fans to no fans. And, NASCAR, watching that NASCAR race, no fans, and they're 5 miles up the road. But they had a lot more restrictions, it sounded like, than wooostock. So it's going to be interesting how all these states navigate it and, what's going to transpire from there.
I'll interject that it was weird there, and it's interesting because each one of these new developments, or whatever the arrangement will be, each one of them have their own nuances and they create issues where, and I'm not throwing anyone under the bus, but one of the ongoing problems that the track management at Darlington were having this past weekend at wooostock were all of a sudden a race team's got 27 crew guys, right? Because the tracks were not limited whatsoever on how many crew members a race team could have, but they weren't allowed to have fans. So we were seeing trucks and trailers pull in from long distances that had 15 crew guys that were behind them in 2 or 3 rental cars, right? And it's just, there's a whole world of new issues to contend with. Not to mention, drag racing isn't necessarily like super huggy and touchy-feely, but man, there's a lot of social interaction at the racetrack. And I witnessed what I believe to be the best effort that I've seen to thwart that I don't even know how to say it, to restrict it, but you just can't do it. It is a virtual impossibility. Every time the sheriff's department and everybody that was involved in like calming things down and spreading people out would make a little bit of progress, a group would just congregate elsewhere. Humans, we're social creatures. We can't, it's so hard to adhere to these guidelines. And I'm praying for anybody that is tasked with trying to legitimately enforce social distancing policies at a racetrack in the coming weeks, because I think they've got their hands full.
Right. Like, as a rule is made, a rule is going to be broken kind of thing. Like, and you can't blame anyone. It's not even intentionally breaking that rule, but as you're saying, like, a new one's made, and then it's just human nature. And that's something I know we've discussed about previously on the show, is like, how do you take that out of racing? Like, how do you just can't.
You see it everywhere, right? Like, look at the beach problem that these communities are facing, where, people just naturally congregate together, and it's just a natural, caveat with what's going on.
One of the things that I noticed this past weekend at wooostock, and I spoke with Keith Berry after the fact, one of my go-tos is to call people and say, okay, highs and lows. I do it with my kids at the dinner table every night. What's the high of your day? What's the low of your day? And I asked Keith those same questions, and he said, it's interesting, Wes, that all the highs produced all the lows. Like, the highs of having a crazy turnout of cars, 300 race cars, 300 heads-up race cars. He goes, that was awesome, and I was over the moon about it. But we were also in no way, shape, or form prepared to handle that kind of car count. We weren't staffed for it. We weren't ready for it. And we didn't have the infrastructure beforehand in place to contend with that. And I think that as what I saw in Darlington above all else was a tremendous level of pent-up demand. People want to race. There were guys there. Going back to Tulsa a couple of weeks ago at the throwdown at T-Town, I saw a top alcohol funny car entered in Super Pro, like in their bracket class, because the dude just wanted to race, right? So he entered his top alcohol funny car in the local no box class, right? And it was hilarious. And you saw a lot of the same thing in Darlington, where guys were just buying tech cards for whatever class they could kind of slide into just because they want to race. So I think every step forward we are going to have as a sport, there are going to be newfound obstacles, newfound hurdles. It's a very interesting time. You're exactly right, Mike. And it will continue. Alex, that leads us, perfect segue, into a slew of other new normals. I spoke about it in the intro to the segment, how different things are going to be for racers from a logistics standpoint. I know you have some thoughts and feelings on how these hotel situations are going to work, restaurants, eating at the track, interacting with others. Where do you stand on it?
Right. So like, I know that at first it's like, how is that important? But let me give my back thoughts on this. So I'm getting ready for Rocky Mountain Race Week at the end of June. And so with that, not only are we racing at 5 different tracks for 5 different days, so bring in the logistics of all of that, we've also got, a 1,200-mile road trip. So, and it's in Colorado, which is a heavily restricted state. So you've got the food and the gas and the travel and all of the logistics around actually getting to the racetrack. I know that's a little bit of a different situation, but I feel like for any racer, you still have that big trip that comes for a lot of the races. So as we've talked before, will that make it where people race more locally? What's it going to look like in the coming months? Will the logistics of getting to the race hold racers back? I know restrictions are being lifted, but then in some places you see where they're put right back down. So I don't know. I think that's something that needs to be discussed because it definitely affects the actual racing itself.
Yeah. So like Carl Tasca, we were talking to him about an NMCA event with his Cobra Jet. And, before we had moved one of our events, the state of Rhode Island where he lives, if you left the state and came back, you had to go under 2-week quarantine. So, and I don't know if that's still in place. Right. But, that could be a problem if that's some states still carry that kind of restriction.
And I hate to keep hitting on quarantine, but it's.
No, I mean, you can't. How can you not hit on it? You're right, Alex. I mean, it's like we're tired. I think everybody's tired and exhausted by this whole situation, but it's impacted everybody in a multitude of different ways. And that's exactly right. I mean, you travel to a race and you return home and all of a sudden you're expected to go under a 14-day quarantine. All the silly things that, like, I'll tell you what, a big problem for West Buck this past weekend in Darlington, South Carolina, is that the hotel people don't service your room overnight. This is a problem. I've spent my entire life sleeping on fresh bed sheets at hotels, and it's a huge issue with me. And I'm thinking to myself, am I going to have to start traveling with bed sheets? This is some bull, what? I couldn't believe it. I walked into my room and I go, what? They didn't even service my room. What? It's like 9 o'clock. What's going on? I ring down to the front desk and like, we're not going to service your room till like a week after you leave. And I'm okay. Yeah, no joke. And that's every hotel, I think, chain has a multitude of different policies, but it's just, I think the point is that we don't even know the lengths and the range of impacts that all of this is going to have on our daily lives. I can't imagine the mental checklist. It's already a lot to get ready to go racing, right? I mean, Mike's done it a million times. Alex, you've done it a million times. I mean, making sure, everything. Do the trailer lights work? Do we have a valid license plate on the trailer? Is the car strapped down? I mean, just all the things you have to do to get ready to go racing. And now you have to think about whether or not you're going to have to go under a 14-day quarantine upon your return home.
Right.
Or make your own bed in the morning.
And that's completely unacceptable.
Big problems.
Really big problems. I mean, I admit it's a first world problem, but it definitely caught me. But you just don't know. You never know where COVID-19 is going to turn up, how it's going to impact you, on a day-to-day basis. So, All right, moving on as we continue through our 3 big things. One of the things that I saw that really just hit me like a ton of bricks was this past weekend in Darlington. This is an event that has, for the last few years, actually admittedly has had many different iterations. Wooostock initially was a no time grudge racing event. That was kind of the bread and butter of the program. late in the promotional cycle, they introduced a big payout Radial versus the World event or shootout that was won by Stevie Fast Jackson. The world record in the class was set. The quickest side-by-side run in the class was set. And it kind of set the tone that Radial versus the World would be the marquee attraction at Wooostock for the foreseeable future. Here in 2020, having been at the event, it is my opinion that the Radial versus the World show, from car count to performance to the nuances, involved with radial racing at a high level, namely track prep, track conditions, ambient air temperatures, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It just makes me wonder a little bit about where we're at in the radial racing life cycle. And this is something that I think exists in every walk of life. Products and things are introduced, and they have a natural, they have a natural journey through the world or whatever. And there's highs and there's lows, and sometimes it plateaus and maintains for a long time. But I think radial racing, and when I say radial racing, what I'd like to really talk specifically about is kind of the largely unrestricted radial versus world program that was made fashionable by Donald Long down in Valdosta, Georgia at South Georgia Motorsports Park over the course of the last decade. I think, Mike, Alex, you will likely both agree that this class has defied all odds in terms of staying power and significance in our community. But I'm telling you, and I don't mean to bash on anybody that was there this weekend, but I don't know that I'd ever seen that type of racing's flaws. No, bear with me here. I know it's super exciting. I know there's records being set and there's all these things, but those cars in the track prep that is required for them to compete and perform consistently, the track temperature being such a critical part of the program, where a lot of times you're forced to have to race late at night. The separation between the haves and have-nots. I mean, you have teams out there competing that are associated with foreign countries, NFL football players, and then you have guys that have tow shops and repair shops that are trying to compete on the same level. And I'm just curious, I personally felt, and this is a bold statement, I felt like I saw Radial versus the World jump the shark. I know I don't know if everybody knows what that even means, but there was late in the glory days of Happy Days, the very classic television show, there was an episode where Fonzie jumped the shark on a pair of water skis, and it was like the end of the show. It marked the last, like, okay, you guys are trying too hard, this deal's over. And I'm not saying radial racing is over, but I really think we've seen Radial versus the World at its height, and I don't know where we go from here.
I think everything has a life cycle, like you said. There are, some people joked it's Radial versus the wallet, right? So that automatically makes that pool shrink a little bit more. I think, when you race for $101,000 one weekend, where do you race next? Is the $5,000 purse, $7,500 purse, or $10,000 purse? That's, that doesn't work. And I think there's a lot that, you see in the market over the years. Pro Extreme went through this as well, right? It gets to a point where the unlimited nature of it starts to push a lot of people out. There's only so many people willing to change your rods and pistons after, 5 runs with a twin screw car at 70 pounds of boost, 80 pounds of boost. So, I think you start to see that in some of the unlimited categories, and it's, the class is great. It's fun, but like you said, it becomes complicated when it's not at the duck races.
I really think that what we're going to need to do is just like Rocky Mountain Race Week. Like Alex that is an event that it's a like singular function. You know what I mean? Like that exists in one part of the United States one time a year. And I didn't mean to cut you off, Alex. I apologize.
That's okay.
I think that Radial versus the World will live on in Valdosta, Georgia, or under Donald the Duck Long's watchful eye. I truly think that, I'm not saying the class is immediately going away, but I think the day of Radial versus the World, you can ask Donald. It was never meant to be a class. It was never meant to be a class of drag racing. It was never meant to be, as Brett Kepner would say, to be an eliminator. It was a once-a-year freak show, which saw immediate success, basically, and Donald expanded on it by having basically what amounts to a spring and fall version of this come one, come all freak show of a drag race, competitive or promoters seeking to jump on the bandwagon started hosting their own radial versus the world races all over the country. And it was never meant to be that. And I feel we are seeing that was never going to be successful. It was never going to be a class it was never going to be pro stock or pro mod or something. I don't think it's franchisable is what I'm saying. It's a restaurant that you can't replicate. They have one, a great one in Valdosta, but you can't buy the franchise and open one in New York and Arkansas and expect to have any success.
I think, but to your point, where a lot of people had said that it, what hurt Radio Versus World, some of the longtime guys, was letting the pro mods in. In my opinion, letting the pro mods in is how it's going to keep going, right? Because like you said, it's that several, 3, 4, 5 times a year at most freak show. And these guys can go use the car somewhere else. They can go run pro mod, and a lot of guys have done that very successfully. I mean, look at the Galat Motorsports guys. They can go back and forth between, PDRA and Radio Versus the World and be successful with it. And I think letting the pro mods in has definitely prolonged it. Now, some of the, I might get some hate mail from, some of the longtime guys that have the all steel cars, but without the pro mods, I don't think the level of attention and longevity would have been there.
I agree. Alex, I cut you off a moment ago. I don't want to squeeze you entirely out of this conversation.
Sorry,
no,
Alex.
That's okay. No, I was just going to say, like, highlight on the fact that I'm not in a position knowledge-wise to say, like, oh, it's too expensive. I don't have that back knowledge. However, you hate to see any class or anything wish it out kind of thing, because, it does draw attention. There's something for everyone. However, like you're saying, I do agree there is a life cycle to it. You can see that, and going to the steel cars and everything, like you're saying, bringing in the pro mods, it's like it's taken on a different mutated form where it is becoming something that that it's not sustainable, maybe. I mean, I'm not in the position money-wise to speak on that, but that's all I had to say earlier.
Well, it's long since been, Alex and Mike will attest to this, the curse of heads-up drag racing, right? I mean, unfortunately, at different times, it's a race to the end, a race to the bottom, and it's an amazing thing while it lasts. And I certainly wish the class well, and I've loved being a part of it. I've loved reporting on it over the years and talking about it on shows like Burnout. But I do wonder what's next. And I ask everybody, all of our viewers, let us know what you think, because one of the things that we want to talk about in the coming weeks is, if not Radio versus the World, then what? What is it? Is it Pro 275? Is it limited drag radial? What class do you think is prepared or is poised to step into that marquee role and carry radial racing forward? So let us know on social media. Hit us up. Use the hashtag Burnout. We'd love to know what you have to think or you have to say about it. And that, guys, is this week's 3 big things.